and welcome to Sugar Melts. For today's card, I've got two samples here before we get started. This is the Cascading gatefold card. So I've got a belly band on here. Pop that off and look at this. How gorgeous is this freestanding card? I included a special way to do the message in the back, but otherwise it just pops open like this and gives such a beautiful, beautiful card. Love this. And then here's another example, once again the belly band, and it opens up, oops, upside down, to this beautiful cascading gatefold card with plenty of room for your sentiment on the back. Isn't that great? Okay, so let's get started now. I'll show you how I made this card.
As I get ready to make the cascading fold card, the fun part, of course, is at the beginning where I pick out the pattern paper that I'm going to use to make each of the panels. I recommend using at least 2 different patterns, but I've used up to 4. As long as they coordinate well, you can use quite a few. I just like to make sure the right side and the left side of the card each match. And then I want to have my 2 sheets of cardstock. The base of the card is going to be 5.5 by 8 3/4. And the other part of the card, the cascading fold card, is going to be a diagonal cut from 5 1/4 on one side to 5 1/4 on the other. It's important that you mark the paper so that you are making that diagonal cut. I like to use white marker on dark paper so that I can see it. And also, when I go to cut, I want to make sure that that white dot is falling on the long end of that diagonal cut, because we'll trim that down when we glue it to the base, and this way it'll be trimmed off and you won't see it. The scoring marks on both pieces are going to match, and these are all listed below in the description. It's 1/2, 2.5, 4.5, 6.5, and 8.5. If the card is already cut to 9 inches, you don't need to do a 9-inch the last score, but I forgot to cut that last part off, so that's why I scored it there so I can trim it later. That last 1/2-inch flap will be folded on the inside towards the card. That way both flaps will hold together. I found it really helpful when I was making this card to have a template also that I made out of, you can make it out of anything, scrap paper, copier paper, junk mail, but it really helps to keep everything in place as you're putting it together and assembling it, to know which flaps will have the pattern paper and which flaps go in different directions, because they are going to cross over when they secure. So the folded part that starts on the left will actually end up being on the right once they're connected together. So here's my template, and you can see I've even written on each panel so that when I go to secure it, I know that I'm doing it in the right direction. The way it's held together is with those slits that are cut halfway up in opposite directions on each fold. And here I am, trimming off that white dot so that won't be visible on the back flap that will be glued down to the base of the card. You can miter these cuts if you want to give yourself a little more wiggle room, or if your paper's not too thick, just make sure you're cutting about halfway up. And before you glue anything, as you can see I'm doing here, I'm always testing it to make sure that I've cut far enough up there so that they hold together. By having the small flaps at the front that are held together by that 1/2 inch fold, it makes a really nice clean opening to that cascade. For the front of the card, since it's a gatefold, I'm going to have the 4 1/4 cut in half, so that'll be 2 1/8, and I give myself another 1/8 of an inch fold because of all the paper that's inside. You want to give yourself a little bit of space there, otherwise it really won't hold together quite as smoothly. And then you'll trim it down so that it'll be at about 8 3/4 with those 2 folds with the binders to keep it together. So now comes the fun part, picking out the papers and deciding which order I want them to go into. The front panels of the gatefold and the inside and the outside, you'll have 2 sets of panels, and then you'll have each of those 4 panels that are marked there on the inside for the cascade. The inside and outside of the gate, those will be 2 inches by 5 1/4. And the inside for the cascade will be a little bit narrower than 2 inches, so I put it at like 1 3/4, maybe 1/8 of an inch larger. And each of them will have a different height because of the ascent of the cascade, and those heights are listed below in the description. I decided that I wanted the outside gatefolds to be one pattern, the inside fold of the gate to be a different one, and then each of the 4 panels of the cascade to be a different color. I really like the contrast that this pink paper gives me so that it isn't as much blue. It's nice to have a splash of another color, so here I am with another paper that is not predominantly blue but has that pink to offset it. It's such a nice contrast. For creating the angle at the top of each of the panels, I'm using a template out of a piece of Post-it paper. This allows me to secure the paper to my field and make that line. Now, each of the panels will have the same angle. The only difference is whether they're going up or down. So the way it works for me is I take the two pieces, the matching ones, and I put the side that's going to show together so that any marks that I'm making are on the underside that will be glued to the paper and they won't be visible. I like to use a white marker on dark paper so that it's visible. I also have a silver pen that I can use that shows up really well on navy and black paper when I make this card. It's really helpful to go ahead and slip them in at this point to make sure they're not too long or that the angle is off in any way. And I just keep it in there as I'm moving through the paper, just to be sure I've got everything in the right spot and I don't accidentally swap them. So you can see I'm using 4 different papers throughout this, but because they coordinate so well, I think it comes together. I'm going to need 2 more pieces for the mat behind the cascade on the base of the card, and then the mat on the back of the card where my sentiment will go. To cover my sentiment on the back, I'm cutting another piece of cardstock, just enough to cover it up, and I'll put a little score at the top so that it will have a flap over the back of the base, and it won't be visible because it will be hidden by the pattern paper. Just give it either a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch score, and you'll be set to have that cover the back. I'm just trimming down another piece of the pattern paper to have as a mat for the sentiment on the back. As you can see, there are quite a few pieces that I have to glue down, so it's important that I have them going in the right direction if they're directional paper and that they're on the panel that I want. So it's helpful at this point to just take a second, pause, and get really organized, otherwise you may glue something upside down or facing the wrong direction. I'm going to glue that flap on first. And then I'll glue the mat over the top of that so that little seam won't be visible. Because the cascade itself is a little bulkier than the rest of the card, that will be the last thing that I glue in there. Otherwise, I'll be working around that the whole time, and I don't want anything to happen to it. So that's the last part that I do. At this point, I'm just gluing down the top and the bottom of that front flap just to give it a little more security so it stays in place. But there, it has such a nice clean fold there in the front. I just want to double check that everything fits, but you can see how thick that is. So that's why it helps to have that 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch gap at the front of the gatefold there, so that everything fits nice and smooth. So now my gatefold card is all assembled. All I have left to do is the sentiment and the belly band. For making the belly band, I'm using that top portion, the remnant from the earlier cut of the base of the card, and I'm doing a 1-inch strip, and I'm going to score that at 3 inches, 3 1/4, then over at 7 1/2, and 7 3/4. That gives me again that little bit of space to wrap around the card nice and easily. I like to glue it together so that the seam of the card is in the front. That way I can hide it behind a decorative die cut or other image. So out of another piece of scrap, I'm just going to do a die cut and then run it through my dry embossing folder for a floral pattern that will actually coordinate really well with the papers that I've chosen. You can make the belly band as simple or as decorative as you like. Always be sure to run your embossing folder through so that the seam goes in first so it doesn't accidentally pop. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please hit subscribe below so you'll be able to watch all my videos on how to make it yourself in a creative way. Enjoy!